Welcome, everybody, and a special welcome to Ed as always. We're continuing with our series around the entrepreneurial excellence. And last week we discussed self-sabotaging behavior, and Ed also took us through a framework around active listening, with the promise that we will continue how to become better at listening. So, Ed, over to you.
Thanks, Jacques. Yes, we certainly did talk about a whole lot of issues, one of which is not listening. Um, and active listening is not just in person listening, but it is very much also in today's world online listening. Um, and we've all had many experiences. I had another one today where an order process for something that I'm trying to buy is actively hostile, does not listen at all. So we can talk about active listening. Let's talk about it first in person. So active listening is the art of listening to what people hear, what people say, and interpreting what they mean by what they say correctly. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds because there are, as I said last week, a lot of potential areas where that can go wrong. There can be differences between what the person thought and what they actually said. This might be due to language issues, it might be due to political correctness, it might be due to cultural issues, might be due to a whole lot of things. It might be just distraction. I thought I'd said this well. And some people don't express themselves particularly well in words. So there may be a big gap there between what someone thinks they are saying and what they actually say. And then there's the gap of what I call the atmospherics, the gap between speaking and hearing. And again, there are a whole lot of potential ways that can go wrong, including things like background noise, including things like distraction, including emotion, including all sorts of areas that get in the way of even hearing what the other person is saying. One of the most common bits of interference is the person doing the listening stops listening and starts thinking about how they're going to respond to what is being said, or interprets what the person is saying before they have completed their thought. So you'll have a situation where I, for instance, am expressing myself to you, and you pretty well know what I'm saying, and probably know what I'm going to say, and perhaps I'm a little long-winded at times. So you interpret what I'm going to say before I've said it. Now, that can be quite dangerous because that might not be what I intended to say. So there's all kinds of interference that can come there. The biggest cause of this is thinking instead of listening,
Mhm.
stopping listening and thinking about how I will respond, especially where there's a lot of emotion involved. There might be some anger, there might be some dispute, there might be some anguish or anything like that. And we stop thinking, we stop listening, and we start thinking, how am I going to respond to that? And coaches and mentors and counselors will be very well aware of this problem, where someone's expressing a view and they in a panic mode saying, well, what am I supposed to say now? And they are so focused on that that they stop listening.
Mm.
Very tricky situation. And then the fourth area is that you actually hear very clearly what the person said, and the person said what they meant to say, but you interpret that differently. So you have your own prejudices, your own life experience, your own backgrounds to it. So if someone says something to you, you will overlay what they're saying to you on your life experiences, on your prejudices, and we all have prejudices of some kind, on your way of doing things, and say, aha, now I can interpret what he is saying into what he is meaning. And you can get that badly wrong. So there's lots of potholes along the way between what I think and what you think you heard, or vice versa. And the only way to correct that is, first of all, intensive listening, and if need be, making notes, which help a lot. And then reflecting back to the person to check that the meaning is clear. Now, this is hyper important in sales environments, where often someone will be sharing information with you which is vital to them solving their needs. And if you get that wrong, you're not going to be solving their needs. And they are going to get very angry with you because you didn't listen. It is also hyper important when you have a dissatisfied customer that are expressing their dissatisfaction, and you're not hearing it correctly. And perhaps you brush it off as immaterial. And that can cause enormous amounts of damage, reputational damage to a business. So, all sorts of blocks there. The way to get around it is by reflecting, by saying, what I hear you say is, and then giving your version of what you think you heard, or what you think the person's intentions were in expressing that thought, and checking that you're doing it. If you do this skillfully, you will find the conversation moves forward very quickly, and it doesn't become stilted where you continually querying, did I hear that right? Um, it's something that a lot of disciplines like coaches and counselors and mentors are taught to do fairly seamlessly. But it's an art to practice. You don't have to use exactly the words you heard. You can paraphrase those words into a different idea. And I would urge people to just try this out in their daily lives. It stops an awful lot of arguments from escalating into things that shouldn't be, because at least the parties are listening to each other.
Would you say it would require a little bit of humility on both sides?
Absolutely, yeah. Recognition that communication between humans is an imperfect tool. And that applies to written communication, it applies to spoken communication, it certainly applies to any kind of electronic conversation like the one we're having now, because we don't have the usual signals that we have when we're face to face. So research has shown very clearly that of all the messages you receive in a face-to-face conversation, only a relatively small percentage is the verbal side of it. The rest of it is the body language, the tone of voice, the um, facial um, actions, um, the whole sense of urgency behind it, the rate of speaking, the even so sight and even smell can become important senses when communicating. So can touch, depending on the circumstances. But I won't go there right now. So when we are actually face to face, we get a lot of signals that we don't get when we're talking on a WhatsApp line, for instance, or on a Clubhouse line, or on a Zoom line. We get some on the Zoom line because we get at least the facial expressions on the Zoom line and maybe some of the gestures, but you don't get the full set of body language. You don't get the sense of touch, and it's not 3D, it's a 2D image. So personal conversation in face to face is different to electronic conversation. And as the world moves increasingly towards electronic conversation, then a lot of those communication signals disappear from our life. And as the world moves more towards text based conversation and away from voice conversation, then even more signals are lost, because then you don't get things like rate of speech and expressions of speech and volume of the speech, the amplitude of the speech, and all the rest of it. We just get a flat line of text. So we need to be very, very careful in our text-based communication. And one of the issues with text-based communication, one of the increasingly frequent issues of text-based communication is online ordering. And often online ordering systems are designed by computer techs, as one would expect, but they're not communication experts. And that is the primary interface with the customer. And, I had a wonderful example just in the last couple of days. As I said, I've been trying to order something from a very respected company, a company I admire massively and have frequently recommended to others. But their online ordering process is dreadful. It's first of all not very visually impaired friendly, because a lot of my technology doesn't work on their site, hasn't been checked for that. And secondly, it comes up with silly messages. So, just as a for instance, I was asked to submit RICA documents. I submitted the 3 RICA documents they asked for, and I got a bold message back saying, your RICA documents have been rejected. Please resubmit valid documents. Now, I, that message, incidentally, was in light blue in dark blue on a light blue background. So almost completely invisible to me and not readable by my technology. Now, I have no idea what they mean. What's wrong? That means I have to phone, go through the whole process of finding a call center operator, and then try and track down. And the call center operator is no wiser than me. She could at least pinpoint which document had been rejected, but not why. Now that's a customer unfriendly kind of way of doing things. You should, at least when someone's trying to buy from you, you should make it easy for them. You should make it positively welcoming and friendly for them. And instead, you're making it computer jargonese for them. And that's just not smart at all. So I would suggest, if you have an online ordering process, go find someone, maybe someone who's not that tech savvy, and get them to place an order on your company and sit and watch. See what happens. You would be horrified in many circumstances by just how difficult your company is making it to listen to your customers trying to buy something. Equally, get someone who's not that tech savvy, perhaps, or even a very tech savvy guy, to express a complaint and see what sort of hoops they have to jump through to get some sort of attention for their complaint. We all know what happens when you put a complaint on social media. You will get an immediate response from the supplying company. Usually, you'll get an immediate response saying, "Please DM me your details and perhaps your order number or something like that." And you DM your details, and then you'll get a form reply back again, and then it just disappears into the ether. So it's now not online anymore, so the company believes they've satisfied the issue. They haven't. They've left a resentful person because they weren't listening to their customer. And listening has to be the most important skill. So in face to face, we said you must reflect and you must actively listen. Take notes if need be. Don't think while you're listening. Just focus on listening. And as you've said, Jock, a little bit of humility on both sides. Don't be arrogant about this. And in online work, especially, a lot of humility from both sides. Give them some slack. Go through their processes, but point out to them where things are not working for you. And remember that among your customers will be disabled people, will be people whose first language is not the language that your order form is in. Um, be very careful about who you are, how you're presenting your company in any kind of electronic format. So, active listening, it happens in all of our lives and with increasing frequency that we make listening mistakes because communication is sped up. And the more we go electronic, the more communication speeds up. We know from the volume of email and the volume of social media and the volume of uh, messages that come through in groups on sites like WhatsApp or Facebook or any of that, that it's actually very, very difficult just to absorb all of the messages that are coming through. And you get into the habit of reading the first lines, saying, oh, I know what this is about, and chucking it away. Because there's simply no time to do the rest. And we tend to fall into that same trap where the communication is really important. Um, where someone may be expressing a complaint about our company, or someone may be trying to buy something from us and not having a lot of success in doing so. And you do not want that to happen at all. So, active listening, Jacques, can you add to that?
Well, I was actually, when you spoke about texts, especially with text tone, is so important, and how do you convey tone? And I was thinking, well, we've got this whole library attached to a text with emojis,
Yeah,
to try and at least convey tone, because I feel that with text alone, if you don't convey tone, or some, at least, and I know it's very artificial, but at least, and a smiley face with what you're saying,
mm,
keeps the tone warm,
yes,
and so forth and so forth and so forth. So I but misunderstanding via text alone, it is, I think it's probably one of the biggest problems that we have,
I believe so,
is
yes.
we talk in terms of shorthand, and we then don't take the time necessarily to clarify, to make sure we've heard properly. That reflecting back must happen in any medium that you have outlined here today.
Yeah,
And why I spoke about humility is not as it's if you have a dollop of humility, you don't jump to conclusions, and you assume that what you've heard is accurate. You always need to understand that your own ears, as you've spoken about, is going to receive, but it's going to pass through some filters, and you got your perceptive lenses on, and that becomes actually what you think you heard, is to say, okay, first pass, now let me test that which I've heard, is that accurate.
yeah.
And but you're right. I mean, the stats that I remember around verbal and non-verbal cues when communicating, it's I don't know how accurate it is, but it's nearly 10% verbal, 90% non-verbal, and
Yeah,
that is so important, to build rapport. You can actually activate your senses when you talk to somebody, and feel what they're saying, and also to remain curious and to be engaged. It's those things. And lastly, just to say, knowing all these things and what you've taken us through, it is to rather be conscious, meaning being deliberate, that you want to ensure that the communication is accurate. Now, especially in the sales environment, especially
mm,
dealing with clients, you gotta always know that you're talking to people from with huge diversity. You've spoken about disabled people, different from different cultures, languages, religious viewpoints. All
mm,
these kinds of things make it quite a a smelter, a hot pot for huge misunderstanding, even when you're doing it face to face. It's just, we can all interpret a smiley face, a
Yes.
natural smile, somebody's attitude when you're with them. But elsewhere, everything that's online via text or so on,
Mm.
you got to deliberately work harder, Ed. And that to me is probably the message, is with that awareness, uh, have make the effort. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I want to touch especially on email because everything you've said with regard to um, communication fail in text goes trebly on email. We very rarely use emojis in email, although we can. Um, but the email is typically a very hurried process, especially if it's in response to another email. It's often written in haste or in anger or in highly critical mode, and it can be very brusque. It can be very poorly thought through. So it's the kind of thing where you're thinking way ahead of your fingers typing. And so what you actually put down in text is very different to what you think that you're conveying. And then it's sent because we never have enough time to handle all our email. Everyone, I'm sure, is in exactly the same boat. And so we are very quick with responses and we're very slow to actually do things like querying, reflecting in email. I'm just about to do that. I received an email from someone and I'm not quite sure of the meaning of this email. So I'm going back to them to say, would you mind just clarifying this? I'm not quite sure what the message behind this email is. And and we can do that in email. It's worth taking the time because if you don't and you respond on what you see on the surface, this can escalate and cost you a heck of a lot more time and a lot more energy than simply clarifying if you're a bit uncertain of what's the mail has said. The emails, in especially, are often very hastily written, um, and we're not all great wordsmiths. We're not good at expressing our thoughts in writing. Not all of us are. And so often, where we would speak fluently, we don't write that fluently because, for whatever reason, maybe we don't read a lot, maybe we um, are in a very great hurry, maybe we're very poor typists. For a whole lot of reasons, our emails may not accurately reflect what our thoughts are. I know in writing articles, my standard practice in writing an article would be to write the article at something close to double the length of the article and then edit it back to the correct length so that I cut out any chance or as many chances as possible of a misinterpretation, that I got my thoughts across as clearly as possible. And to write a 1 page article could take a full day easily. That sounds silly, but at least there, the information was absolutely crystal clear. And if you're writing for publication to a very large audience, then that is the kind of clarity that you need. And sometimes when you're doing email, that's the kind of clarity that you need, especially that angry email. Draft it by all means, but don't send it just yet. Cool down, go back, look over it, edit it, and decide whether you want to send that or some kind of different message. So, email is a bad one. And email, like verbal communication, goes in chains. So, You write me an email, I respond to the email, you respond to my response, I respond to your response, you respond to my response, I respond to your response, and so on. By the time we get to the sixth or seventh forwarded mail, a lot of the meaning may have been lost from the original one. So we need to be very, very careful with email. Rather, just don't go through every email or don't feel the need to reply every time someone says something on email. Sometimes it's best just to ignore. And the same is very true on social media. A lot of people feel the need to respond to every post that is on a particular subject. It's probably not necessary. And it can be hostile because your words and how people interpret your words may be very different to the way you're thinking. And there isn't any way to reflect in those kind of environments. So, active listening. What I want to do next week, Jacques, is I want to look at setting your company up to be a salesperson friendly company, setting it up for maximum success for your team, even if that team is you. So we look forward to that next.
Ah, wonderful, Ed. Thank you very much. That exercise that you want us to do to eventually just listen to something and see how well we can retain, I think it's still a worthwhile exercise
Yeah,
to
that
try and
we
do.
will do. It's just
Yes.
going to take a little time to do to get me organized. As you know, I've moved house, which is a very mammoth exercise, much bigger than I thought it would be. And there's still a little bit of a state of chaos around here. So it'll take a little while, but sometime during November, we definitely will do that one.
Oh, excellent, Ed. We look forward to that, but no pressure whatsoever. And we look forward to next week's topic. And
Look forward to it.
awesome, Ed. Thank you. And thank you for those who are listening and attending this event with us. And until next week,
Until next week.
bye
Cheers.
for now.